I've ever read. I kind of get the gist, and I'll remember some of the important details, maybe a lot. It depends. How much you remember is based on how much you already know. If you already know, like if you already know a whole lot, for instance, about the Civil War, and you read a book about the Civil War, you're very likely to remember quite a few details because they're going to fit in with other information you already possessed about that and about the Civil War. Whereas if you've never ever, didn't know anything about the Civil War and you read a big book about it, you'd learn a lot, but you'd retain not as much. That's just kind of how it works for most people, and that's how it works for me. Oh, here's another question. Sorry. I myself still read quite often, but have tried to distance myself from knowledge for its own sake because I felt I was living in a vacuum, frustratingly impotent, like a distant bird watcher. Do you ever experience this sort of thing? No, I don't think that knowledge is for its own sake. I mean, well, I get enjoyment out of knowing things, so maybe that's true, but it is actually useful in understanding the world, and I think that's important, even if you're not saving money on groceries because you know about Ming era China or whatever. You understand the world better, and that's valuable to me. Alright, LambDog76. What are your thoughts on Peter Schiff lately? He called silver a strong buy last October at its high of 35 and appears to only have one message. Do you believe his membership in the Mises Institute is warranted? Sure, I think his membership in the Mises Institute is warranted, but it is... I don't think you can call him a good investor because he always says, because you're right, he basically says more or less the same thing all the time, which is buy precious metals and there's going to be inflation, and that becomes self-fulfilling prophecy eventually. So but you can say he's a good investor just because he makes profits, assuming that he does. Everything I've heard is that Euro-Pacific Euro-Pacific Capital on net makes money. They don't always make money, but it's a successful investing firm, and so that would be the main basis for Peter Schiff's credibility. The Peter Schiff was right video. It is interesting. I mean, it seems like he's calling it correctly, but on the other hand, how long was he saying that? It gets, I don't know. That's what he's going to say all the time, and there's going to be times when that's right, And so the Austrians who have been saying buy gold and silver and blah 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 for all this time, yeah, that's been wise much of the time. Silver at $35. I mean, I have silver I bought at $35, and I don't feel like I'm hurting any. But I'm not trying to flip any of it. That stuff is just, I just buy physical, and it just goes away. I take it and I store it, and I'm not thinking. I don't even think about using that for years from now. And I highly doubt it's going to be whatever it is right now, 18 or 20 or 28 or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it will. It's not impossible. And so whether or not it's a good buy depends on what you're going to use it for. If you're going to try and turn a quick profit, I know I probably shouldn't say this, but I know people who have lost a lot of money, betting that silver was going to go up when it didn't. And if if you do that because Peter Schiff said it was a good idea, then I would I don't know. He has his political philosophy is right enough that he makes money, so that's good. Assuming that's the sole basis for how he makes his decisions, and I can't say that it is. I don't find him that interested any longer, so I don't really make a point to watch all the videos I see. I'm not an active investor. I don't follow the market. There's a lot of YouTubers who do that, and they're watching everything, and I'm subscribed to a lot of those guys, a lot of young guys who are just really into the stock market and following everything, and I'm not that into it like that. I'm much more into the long game, and so my concerns aren't if it goes up or down a little bit right now. I like it when it goes down because then I just buy more. But yeah, all right. Meat of Peach. What is your job title and which company do you work for? I'm not going to tell you which company I work for. It's a tiny company. You wouldn't even be able to ever. I'm sure you've never heard of it. The job I do is normally called a quote-unquote mud logger, and a log in the sense of like a map, like you make a log of a log entry or whatever. As they drill a well, they drill through different types of rock. It's my job to take those rocks that have been drilled, to analyze them. I have a microscope and a whole bunch of chemicals, and you know, obviously I figure out what type of rock it is. I write a description about its hardness, the sorting, the grain size, you know, chemical properties, basic things like color, shape, what kind it is. It's usually shale or limestone or sand, so it's all sedimentary rocks and oil, at least so far. And then I take that information, and then I also take all the information about how much gas is coming out of the well, what types of gas. There's 5 different hydrocarbons that we track: C1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's methane, ethane, butane, isobutane, and one other one I don't remember right now. CO2, and I basically make a stratigraphic map of the well that shows how fast they're drilling, what kind of rocks, what kind of gas, and I produce that as they drill, and then I send that to the geologists. They're usually in Houston or Denver or some other faraway place, and I also talk to them every day and say, okay, this is what we're drilling in. The wells I do in West Virginia are horizontal wells, which means they're trying to stay within a certain formation. So the main part of my task is to make sure that they don't drill out of that formation, because all the oil and gas is in a certain formation, and if they drill a hole in the wrong formation, then they just drilled a very expensive deep hole. So it's worth them to have me be there to tell them, hey, this is right or wrong. And you know, it varies. Some places I have a lot more direct impact on actual drilling operations. In other places where I've worked, I basically am telling them when to stop, when to start, when to set casing. I'll do conference calls with the entire company. I'm very not uncommon to call and say, we're going to put you on speaker with the entire board, and they want to know, you know, if we should stop or not, which is kind of interesting. But other places, you know, they're kind of almost just dialing it in, and I'm only there just to make sure that there isn't a huge problem. The more sophisticated title will be on-site geology, since it is essentially geology that I'm doing, but it's not that. I don't have a geology degree. It's just kind of on-the-job training. It's not that hard to learn the difference between shale and limestone and sandstone, claystone, whatever. But that's what I do. In oil field speak, we're usually called mud loggers. The reason you're called a mud logger is because the samples that are cut, they get washed to the surface, usually in mud, although sometimes they use air. And you wash the mud off, and inside it there'll be basically, we call them cuttings. It's basically like dust or sand that's been chewed up by the drill bit and pumped to the surface. Gangadin asks, if you and 1,000 ANCAPs were presented with the opportunity of going soldiering in the third world countries, say as peacekeepers protecting the locals from warring factions, in exchange they would grant you a piece of land to start your Ancapistan, would you take it? Would you go soldiering? That's very circumstantial. That depends on the land that's going to be offered, the potential, the risks involved in doing the soldiering, the likelihood of being I think a lot of places the UN would just step in and be like, you can't do that, like they did in Katanga or whatever. So yeah, that's just totally circumstantial. It was a really sweet deal, and you had, you know, but I'm not a soldier, I'm not a mercenary, and so I would want to be reasonably sure that I would be able to you know, at least have the chance of not, you know, getting killed in the process. But yeah, it's circumstantially, it's possible. I don't think that's particularly likely, but it's not impossible. Tortoise Dream, since I'm in France currently and studying the French Revolution a bit, what is your take on the French Revolution? Was the motivation libertarian? What do you think was the cause? Was it influenced by the American Revolution? Was Napoleon Was Napoleon a component of the revolution? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I am told that the revolution and also the post-World War II La Resistance Française are, sorry about that, I don't speak French really, are what mostly shape modern French identity. I'm not an expert, I gotta be honest. From what I understand, it's widely accepted the American Revolution at least partially inspired the French Revolution, but you have to remember that the Anglo-Americans have a fairly distinct political philosophy history as compared to the Romance countries like France. So, you know, they saw we had a revolution, so they had their own. It was considerably more violent, like orders of magnitude more violent. You know, the Great Terror, I think you're talking like 100,000 people died, and they're just, the American Revolution was by no means perfect, but the scale of depredation just wasn't anywhere even close to that. So it was considerably less libertarian in that sense. It was much more authoritarian, and it had much more to do, I think, with kind of nationalism. It's somewhat libertarian that they didn't like being ruled by a king, but then they just wanted to replace that in large part by rule by an even more despotic state. And ultimately, you know, when you get to Napoleon, Napoleon was a component of the revolution, and then he basically made himself, he crowned himself emperor. I don't know if he ever crowned himself king. I don't know. But yeah, I don't feel a lot of kinship with the French Revolution, and there's distinctly fewer French libertarians per capita than there are, say, of Germans or Northern Europeans, and certainly English. I mean, there's a couple of them on YouTube, and I've met a few. There's Francois, who goes to Porkfest, but Francophone countries just are a lot less libertarian, and I couldn't say why, but they are. My phone beeped, 1 second. Oh, predictable. What are your general thoughts on geo-libertarianism? Is that like Georgism? Because if it is, it's almost right, except it's wrong about public ownership of all land. And if that's not geo-libertarianism, then I don't know what geo-libertarianism is. That was from Happy with What's There. Gamba God, are you still on the primal paleo diet? Have you come out to your family and friends about being an ANCAP? I'm not strictly on the, like, if we were going to ask Rob Wolf and assess if I was on the paleo diet, he would say no. Because I am not strict about it. I'd say I'm on 75–80% paleo diet. I don't eat very much carbs. I eat mostly stuff that they recommend. I cut out dairy, I cut out most of the refined sugars to where it's not on a daily basis. It's just every couple days I'll eat a little bit. And I've been inconsistent. I just came out again on vacation. I don't read, I don't work out, I just totally veg out. So when I come to work, I just do a lot better. I have not come out and told my family I'm an ANCAP, but I also, whenever we have discussions, you know, and I think this is actually a good strategy. You don't come out and say I'm an ANCAP, but on whatever position you're talking about, you just argue against the government involvement in that area. And you can become really persuasive without necessarily going into you're crazy because you're radical. I think that they know at this point, because they're friends with me on Facebook, and I know that they've scrutinized my account, at least initially. I don't think they do this any longer, but whenever it was still a novelty, I think they really looked at it. And they're like, what is that? And they probably looked it up. But they just know I'm radical, but there's other people who are radical in my family, so I don't think it's necessarily that strange. Shalashaska, here's my question, what does your channel name mean? It is an anglicized spelling of an Icelandic question, and that's all I'm going to say. Some of you know the answer. Government did it. What are your views on children in a free society? I actually have a video titled Child Parent Obligations. It's one of the first videos I did where I basically hash it out. I think that children, if they assert their sovereignty, I think that has to be taken pretty seriously. I don't think that there's a magic period where children are their property of their parents or belong to their parents. I think that as soon as they're exist, that they're humans, and that we have to treat that pretty seriously. Now there's a point where they're not even asserting this. A little baby is not going to say, "Here's my property rights," and this is my and so it's moot. But at some point, once they start doing that, we have to take that seriously. So, what do you think about the leftist use of the term neoliberalism when referring to classical liberalism and libertarianism? I think it's the left is main way of arguing is to just label things something bad. And so calling it neoliberalism is to say it's reactionary, it's old school, it's an old idea, and it's just got a new label on it, so it's neoliberalism. That's just kind of how they like to argue, is by pigeonholing you with a name. So yes, it could be an academic smokescreen. Thoughts on the conspiracy theories on Lincoln, and in particular the Kennedy assassinations? Well, Lincoln, there was no question that it was a conspiracy between John Wilkes Booth and whatever I can't remember all their other names. Was there a wider one? I've seen the it was the Rothschilds, and it was the proto-feds, and that doesn't make sense, because Lincoln essentially instituted the National Banking Act in 1863. It wasn't just him. There are lots of people who were behind it, and he signed it. We got the proto-Federal Reserve System. We got a national banking system from Lincoln. So the common idea that he was out there to stop the bankers is kind of silly. This is weird. A lot of conspiracy theorists who are into anti-Fed stuff just attribute assassinated presidents as being against the Fed, like JFK, and that's just ridiculous. They were not anti-Fed. I tend to think that Lincoln was killed by Booth for being a tyrant, but there could have been other people. There certainly could have been people involved who weren't arrested, but I don't see the banker connection. Kennedy, I'm just one of those guys. I'm positive he was assassinated by more than one guy. I'm positive that Oswald was involved, but more than that, I'm not sure. My personal favorite ones, the ones that ring truest to me, are that the CIA was involved, and there are any number of plausible reasons why, but I can't say for sure. Also, your thoughts on the YouTube video, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. Do you think that the information and these presented in this video, I didn't see this video, so I don't know. Expellidac. Will you get a wife and make a family? Maybe. We'll see. In the past, you said you don't know. Again, I say I don't know. Do you believe that fools want to be fooled? No, I just think that they get fooled. I don't think they want to be fooled. Fooled, therefore, it's an obligation for the strong to overpower the weak if they want. If they want to, but I don't think they really want to. That's a coping mechanism. Are we already in a state of anarchy being imagined as some kind of order by the masses? I don't know. I guess in a sense, but not in the more important sense. What's your ethnic background? Mostly, I don't know, mostly, it's German and English. I'm not sure. My surname is German. On one side of my family it's primarily German, but the other side of the family is primarily English, so I don't know. Pretty big mix of everything. Which will be the first Western country to fall? Oh, I don't know. Could be the United States. It's certainly the largest Western country, so. Will there ever be a far-right political country like a cowboy land, and when? I don't know, so I don't know. Have you ever been in a fight? No, so no details. What's your ethnicity? I think I just answered that. JMC Knight 00. What do you think of the idea of capitalism and socialism have become, as Rand would say, anti-concepts? is the way their detractors, and I say this on both sides, use them, and many people use them in normal day parlance. Yes, they're just floating abstractions where people are, if that's what an anti-concept is, you know, they're just, I don't like it, so I'm going to call it capitalism or socialism for that matter. And that's true, but then people do use them in more explicit meanings. You know, there are socialists who have a very definite idea of what they mean by both terms, and there are capitalists who have a very definite meaning. So the problem is you can't tell that just by hearing the use of the word, and that means that whenever these capitalism, socialism debates happen, the first thing that has to happen is there has to be a very explicit, this is what I mean, what do you mean kind of thing. Otherwise, we just are, you know, throwing bricks at the wrong house. So, have you ever tried the Dukan diet? And no, a legal immigrant has, and it's worked with him. And I think the commonality you see with most of these diets that people say work is that they're low carb and or no carb, and there's low and basically cutting out refined sugars, actually most sugars generally, and any diets that kind of incorporate that seem to do fairly well. Whether they're paleo or Atkins or Dukan. He really likes the Dukan, but I haven't tried it. Do you have a workout routine? If so, what do you do? I do, and I don't know what's the point in saying, because you know I don't have the results to necessarily show for it. I do plan on doing that. I get enough results that I'm confident that if I manage to keep it up long enough, there'll be a point in addressing this further. But I'm not to that point yet, so I'm not going to. Any pets? Not really. If America is the country that left home to become a rich entrepreneur, and Canada is the country that stayed at home to work at Burger King, what is Mexico? They have different parents, and they're not that different from their. I mean, Spain, Mexico, there's not a huge difference other than they're more Native American in Mexico. But it's different parentage, totally different. They were just neighbors. This next one is the easiest question on here. If you were offered a signed copy of every book from every Austrian economist, past and present, or a threesome with Jonathan Catalan and Philip Vegas, which would you choose? Easily the threesome with Catalan and Vegas. There's just no question. Son of Tana, my question for you is, where do you buy your t-shirts? Just a second. Hello? Yeah, I'll call him in a sec. Yeah. No problem. Yep, bye-bye. My question for you is, this is from Sonatana, where do you buy your t-shirts? Well, the ones that I think you're talking about, there's two spots. One, I get all those shirts with the economist heads and stuff on it. Those are from the Mises Institute in their shopping section. And then the other ones, like the God King Obama and some of the gun control ones, are from Zazzle, ZAZZLE.com, and they have a whole bunch of libertarian themed stuff. So that's where you can go for that sort of thing. Do you ever read books that you completely disagree with, i.e. books that specifically target capitalism? I haven't in a long time. I think I read the Communist Manifesto once, but it's been a long time. One of the things I have thought seriously about doing is reading things like The General Theory and Das Kapital and other things like that. I've watched plenty of videos. I mean, obviously I've watched the Zeitgeist movies and the Venus Project stuff. I kind of rationalize this by saying, look, I have so much stuff I want to read that I don't have time, but I will eventually get to it. The thing is, most of the stuff I read isn't by libertarians, and it's not even about libertarianism. And most history books have a decidedly Marxist bent. And even if they're not talking about pros and cons of Marxism, that's kind of where they come from. And so I'm exposed to a lot of it, but it's not the same thing as someone who's attacking something I believe in, absolutely. So, no, I haven't yet, not very much anyway, but perhaps someday I will. Tortoise Dream asks another question, the second question, if you don't mind. How would you argue that the current U.S. is not a free market? Because it's not. I mean, because a free market would imply no regulation and no taxation, and we have both of those. Yeah, he says that it's a myth. They say this in Europe all the time. Yeah, I mean, a free market would mean that there couldn't be any regulations preventing people from making transactions, and there are on all levels, and there couldn't be any taxes that tax those transactions, and those would include income or property taxes. And I mean, it's so obvious, and both of those have been growing on net for decades. You know, every once in a while this or that tax might go in abeyance, or this or that regulation might sunset, but on net they're just increasing all the time. This is just a ridiculous, you know, this is, you know, people who say this just don't have no basis in reality. This is either a myth, and it's different. Like, Europeans, they're rationally ignorant about the United States, and I don't blame them for being ignorant about the United States, just like Americans are ignorant about Europe. You know, they don't need to know that much about it, so they don't. But people in the U.S., if they're anti-capitalist, it just has to fit their narrative, so that's just what they say, even though you can't really back it up most of the time. Internet blowing, also confused about your channel name. Again, I'm not going to go into more detail. Some of you know what it is. If you know what it is, you can put it in the comments. You have my permission, but I'm not going to say. In your opinion, why does just really quickly, when I first got onto YouTube, I didn't make any videos. I didn't post, and I don't even think I made any comments, maybe a few. When I first signed up for YouTube, actually, I didn't even have internet where I lived, and I was just using like a computer lab in college. And I would just occasionally make comments, but I wasn't subscribed to anybody. And just one time I came in, I could not remember what my username was or anything, so I had to set up a new one. And this was just a random kind of thing that was on my mind right at that moment, and that's what I used. So there wasn't any what would be a good YouTube name to make videos on that's ironic or anything. It's just something that was on my mind at the time, and it got plastered on there. And it was years after that. It was still, that was probably in 2006, and you know, I started commenting a lot more after that, and actually subscribing to people. But that was still 5 years before I made my first video, and then, you know, now people are like, what does that mean? And it's not that big a deal. Oops, almost done. Adel Jacob. Hey, how do you like this guy's arguments? Blah, blah, blah. Is anarcho-capitalism actually statism? This is, he gives a link to Anarcho-Pac's video that anarcho-capitalists are statists. Actually, Jacob, and I mentioned this in the comments, I made a video response to him. It's in, he approved it, so it's, if you go to those videos, you'll see my video response. I think the title of my video is, some people are statists, or nobody is statist, some people are more statist than others. Basically, I'm not real happy with the monopoly on use of force definition of a state, but even if that's the one we accept, then anarcho-syndicalists are almost certainly also statists, because let's just say they have a worker-owned factory that's run either by voting or by consensus building, you know, and there's no hierarchy, and it's, you know, they're kind of perfect socialist system. And then somebody else, either from another commune or you know, bloodthirsty anarcho-capitalists or statists, you know, walks onto their property and, you know, just starts taking stuff. Are they going to just say, well, we can't do anything about it, or are they going to stop him, you know, with violence? Are they going to use self-defense? Or even if just one member of, you know, say you got 100 people, well, just, you know what, I'm just going to take some of this capital equipment back to my house. Are they just going to let them walk away? And if they do, as soon as they assert themselves, as soon as they defend themselves, and they are becoming a state by his definition. You know, because his contention is, if you defend your house, if you defend your practice, if you pay a DRO to defend your business, then that's a state. Well, they're going to do defense as well, or else the system is pointless, and then they're a state as well. And in the comments of my video, on that video, you'll see he did comment, and, you know, all his arguments just break down to, if democracy, however defined, is doing something, then it is utilitarian, then it's moral, then it's just that, then that's it. Like, all he has to do is say it's democratic, and then end of story, that's enough. And that's not enough, because there's really pertinent questions to be asked about the utility, the morality, the ethics, the practicality of democracy. And he said he'd get back to me on that. And I mean, if we ever figured it out, maybe I don't subscribe to him, so if he posts, maybe he posts a video about it. I just didn't see. But so many socialist arguments just boil down to that. Like their common denominator is it's democratic, however defined, and then that's it. And they feel like they don't have to go any further than that because they build this entire socialist framework, but at the root is it has to be democratic. And I just and the thing is they get away with that because democracy is this positive buzzword in Western society that for most people, oh, all right, well, I guess I can't argue with that, but then I'm not going to concede that point because I think democracy is stupid, and I'm going to be like, that makes no sense. No, that is a bad system. There are systemic abuses and problems in any system that's going to be based on that, and so I don't accept that it's just fine because you say democracy. And he has yet, to me anyway, to defend that. But Hourglass Shrugged. What is your opinion of Adam Kokesh and his recently planned but failed open carry march? This is, of course, before he got arrested. What is your opinion on such acts of civil obedience as a form of activism? What sort of activism would you think to be the most effective in promoting libertarianism and eventually achieving the goal of self-freedom? The March on Washington, I had mixed feelings because I think obviously there's nothing aggressive about walking with guns. It's legal in almost the entire country. Open carry is more legal than concealed carry, actually, in most places. And, you know, it's just silly that it's illegal in Washington. So I thought that, in that sense, you know, it's okay. And I like the idea of the government being intimidated. However, I think there were very legitimate questions about how this is going to be perceived and that's the whole point. If you're trying to generate attention, if you're just going to come across as a Nazi or, you know, whatever, then it's probably not a good idea. And the police, you know, it would have been interesting and nerve-wracking to see what would have happened if they tried to go through with it. Now, what he ended up doing, I actually thought was a lot better. Him taking a video meant that there was no confrontation. And so they were kind of, oh, it already happened, you know, but there was no shootout, you know, so there wasn't a direct confrontation, and then but there still gets to be all this publicity because they did eventually come and arrest. I actually think it would have been, you know, if they had had a secret march or something where they had filmed like hundreds of people had done that, you know, it'd be interesting to see if they went and hunted them all down, like, or, you know, I mean, it would have been a bigger deal. Civil disobedience, sometimes it generates really good publicity and it gets people to really think, but very often it doesn't have that effect, and so its net utility is not as much as some people think. I think a lot of people feel like they need to do it to kind of show that they're serious or to show that they really mean it, and if it makes them feel, you know, better, then fine. And also, it is good to, like, get to know the government, you know, to see how they work, to feel how they operate, and to become accustomed to that, to the point where it doesn't shock you when you are confronted with it when you're not expecting it to, you know. Because if you've been arrested numerous times, you know, for going to protests or whatever, you know, when the cop shows up at your house because of a noise complaint, you're probably going to be able to carry yourself better than if you've just never been arrested or never even been confronted with by the police. But in terms of, is that going to convince everybody? Probably not. And, only in very unusual circumstances, and probably And I think what's kind of happened is the internet has now made it so there's enough of an echo chamber where the libertarians are going to see it and they're going to like it and they're going to say yes, but how much of the rest of society is going to see that? Not as much, and the reaction is usually not as positive. I mean, it's not to say it's wholly negative, it's just not as positive. But, you know, libertarians aren't going to watch that and say, oh, he's just a kook who's asking for trouble. But plenty of normal people who see that will react in that way. And some will say, no, it makes sense or whatever. So I think that there's a disproportionate, well, there's a couple reasons it's become an issue, is because some of the largest libertarian media organizations are based in Keene, New Hampshire, in the Free State Project. and they're as geared towards civil disobedience as they can be, and so it kind of warps how and which is not to say they're the only people doing civil disobedience. Obviously, Adam Kokesh being a pertinent contemporary example. Liberty is Not Given has been musing about this forever, because, or not forever, but for a long time, because then they go to prison, and how much good are they doing in prison? And yeah, those are questions. But if it makes them feel better, or makes them feel like, they've got the cojones, and they do kind of, I mean, look, it's worse than playing with fire. I mean, the cops, not only can they beat you and torture you, they can kill you. And it's very unlikely anything would happen. So, I'll give them props for that, but in terms of how effective it is, not necessarily that much. But it's their skin, so I mean, if they want to risk it, even if I don't think it's that useful, I mean, by all means. Also, though, think it's good to start drawing lines, because you don't want to just, I'm always going to retreat, I'm always going to retreat, I'm always going to retreat, because then you just end up getting put in a cage anyway. Like, you're going to end up in prison anyway, more or less, if you're just going to say, nah, I give in, I give in, I give in. And so, maybe there'll be more times for this in the future, but that's basically how I feel. So, all right, that is the last one. I should probably call. It's getting pretty antsy. But, all right, I'll talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.